Good evening, everybody. My name is Levy. I am a councillor here in Enfield, and I'm in the unusual situation of addressing you from my home to introduce you to the 2021 Holocaust Memorial Day event in Enfield. Normally, I'd be standing in front of you in the Dugdale Centre, linking together speeches, films, contributions, music, and taking you through a journey of commemoration and acknowledgement and better understanding of the Holocaust and why we have Holocaust Memorial Day. This year, of course, is a year different from all other years, and it prevents us from being there. But it's my view, very strong view, that despite the tragedy and inconvenience and difficulties and surrealism that we're all going through at the moment, nothing that we're experiencing now compares in any way to the depth and the depravity that was the Holocaust. And it was also my view and view of many of us here in Enfield who have put tonight's event together that nothing was going to stop us from having a 90-minute event on the 27th of January, starting at 7 o'clock here in Enfield. And this is where we are, and this is what we're doing. The event, of course, will be a little less mellifluous than it usually is. And so for the purposes of letting you know what's going to happen today, we're building up to a crescendo. In about an hour's time, I'll be introducing you to a new film called Be the Light. It's a 30-minute film, very harrowing in part, very graphic in part, but actually detailing the theme of Holocaust Memorial Day this year, which is Be the Light in the Darkness. Now that phrase can mean an awful lot to an awful lot of people in different ways, but fundamentally, for me at least, it is about making sure that hope is that which drives us, and that resilience of the human spirit in the face of the most awful adversity is something that we must all keep with us. And this is about messaging. In 2021, here at Enfield, we've put a lot of effort into working with the schools. And to that extent, I have to make particular reference to the Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education, and indeed RE Today, who have been magnificent behind the scenes in helping the council put together a curriculum pack, an educational pack, focused on the Year 10 communities in our schools in Enfield, and embedding it in the curriculum so that the next generations can perpetuate the message that we here have been doing in Enfield on the 27th of January for the past 21 years. Indeed, we were one of the first councils to actually pursue this. The event tonight is facilitated by Enfield Council, but fundamentally the day is driven by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and the Holocaust Educational Trust. And the HET does this work throughout the year, working with schools, other institutions, other organisations, introducing those Holocaust survivors who are still around to take them into the schools and share their first-hand experiences. But the reality is that cannot go on forever. So the torch has to be borne by the next generation. And that torch is one of the lights in the darkness. And the contributions you'll be hearing later on in the film will reflect that. We have to give our thanks, of course, to the schools and the heads of the secondary schools in particular for their amazing cooperation in being sure that this message is being transmitted sensibly, sensitively, but without holding back, because you cannot sanitize something as depraved as the Holocaust. Just before we start events on, I'm just going to let you know that the event is going to be in two parts, in effect. The first part is going to be a succession of speakers, primarily from the faith communities across the denomination of the Jewish faith leaders, and there will be also contributions from the council itself. But the HMD event, Be the Light in the Darkness, is a situation where the message is far more important than the messenger. It's the message that predominates, and we want those of you who are watching tonight live, or indeed after the event, to reflect on what you know, reflect on what you hear, and hopefully, particularly those of you at the younger age of the spectrum, how you're going to take this forward and be sure that in 21 years' time, you'll still be participating in taking the message of Holocaust Memorial Day forward. So without further ado, I'm going to take a pause now, but reminding you that the pinnacle of tonight's event is a film that comes on at about 8 o'clock, an hour from now or so. I'll be back to introduce that film, say a few more thank yous, and lead you forward. But for now, sit back, relax, and listen hard to what you're going to hear from the number of speakers who will introduce themselves.
I'm pleased that Enfield Council is marking Holocaust Memorial Day once again this year. We normally would meet at the Dugdale Centre, but this year we're doing things differently, virtually, online, so that we can protect ourselves from the virus. I know that Holocaust Memorial Day is incredibly important to so many people across our borough, especially to our Jewish community. The theme this year of being light in darkness is a reminder of the strength that everybody can have during difficult times. I want to send my best wishes to everybody across our borough and once again mark the Holocaust Memorial Day.
Good evening. Every one of us can be a light in the darkness. And how dark was life for those millions of victims of the Holocaust. To me, this day is especially important. My own wife was raised by a father who was deported from Mulhouse in France to a concentration camp in Bordeaux. And how dark was life for him. Hope is one of the great keys of life itself. If you can see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, then you can have the strength to see out the hours and years of darkness and torment. The light of hope can come in so many different ways. Perhaps one of the greatest lights came to Hungary in 1944. A survivor reported the following scene. We'd given up hope until one day we heard a fantastic story of a prominent Swedish diplomat called Raoul Wallenberg, who had come to Hungary on a mission to save the Jews. Every day, at great personal risk, he delivered people from the hands of the Nazis. He talked to us. He showed us that there was one human being who cared, one angel in all this hell. I came to save a nation, he said. He would print his own Swedish passports, then run after the train depots, the trains that were leaving for Auschwitz, and he would reach out to the desperate group of outstretched arms, giving them their passports to life. He said, I have come to save a people, and he saved 18,000, although sadly, after the liberation of Budapest, the Russians kidnapped him, and he was never seen again. But you don't need to act in a large scale to make a difference. Even a word of comfort can mean so much. Malka Sternberg relates that as a schooled girl in Germany, when a Nazi officer entered the classroom, he called out, "Put up your hand if you are a Jewish pupil." All Jewish pupils must sit at the back of the class in order to degrade them. Yet when the Nazis left, the headmaster declared, from now on, only the best children sit at the back. The seat at the back is the seat of honor. Even a word of encouragement can mean so much. Vera Giesing, herself a refugee child, saw another little girl with no shoes. She ran over and gave away her own shoes, the little poor waif. And her mother said, "My little dear, you did the right thing." Sometimes a tiny chink of light can mean so much. Anatoly Sharansky was a prisoner of conscience during the communist regime in Russia. His crime? He wanted to practice his religion, Judaism. One day during his trial, Sharansky requested to be allowed to select a lawyer of his own choosing, rather than the stooge given to him by the Soviet authorities. The judge reacted by declaring a recess and had Sharansky thrown into a tiny holding cell. There, with hardly any light in the dark compartment, and to pass the time, he stared at the various curses and inscriptions which were scratched on the walls. But suddenly, amongst all the curses etched by previous man, he saw a message of hope and inspiration scratched on the wall. A Star of David etched in the wall stood out proudly amongst all the other marks of frustration. The words Chazak ve'ematz, be strong and brave, were energetically etched out beneath it. It was signed, Prisoner of Zion, Yosef Begun. Sometime after his incarceration, Begun was freed and allowed to go to the West. So Sharansky thought, if Begun has been saved, then so can others. And this scribbling on the wall became his ray of hope. The institution of Holocaust Memorial Day is one of the ways of broadening that legacy of hope, of making the light at the end of the tunnel brighter for all those victims of genocide, not only for Jews, but also for non-Jews, for those who have suffered in Rwanda, Kosovo and Bosnia. Yet so much more work needs to be done. In many countries, Holocaust denial is declared a crime, but this is not universal. Rabbi Michael Weismantel predicted some 10 years after the Holocaust that certain non-Jews would eventually deny what happened altogether to the Jewish people. The very fact that we're all listening tonight is a source of hope for others. General Eisenhower was so shocked by what he saw when he liberated a death camp at Olof that he sent photographs of the camp to Churchill and asked for a dozen leaders of Congress and a dozen prominent newspaper editors to fly at once to Europe and to see the camps for themselves. And yet Sir Martin Gilbert, the official biographer of Churchill, was told by one of Churchill's friends, "You can't just praise Churchill all the time. He had one particular fault. He was too fond of Jews." That man did not know that Sir Martin was himself a Jew. Let there go forth from this programme this evening the vital message that we will never stand idly by. If so, those martyrs who died so pitifully will have helped to build a new world in which justice will always prevail and compassion and love for our fellow man and woman will rule supreme for all time. Thank you very much.
The late Chief Rabbi, the late Rabbi Dr. Lord Sachs, often said, interestingly, that in the Hebrew language, there is no word for history. The word is memory. You will not find an actual description of the word history in the Hebrew language. What does it mean, memory? Because anything that happens in the past has to be remembered and relived, if necessary, as appropriate. So when we talk about the Holocaust, we remember. What do we remember? Which aspect do we remember? People say we should never forget. What is it that we shouldn't forget? Is it that we shouldn't forget the victims, or we shouldn't forget the perpetrators? What is it that we should not forget? Well, in my view, we mustn't forget two things. Number one is the victims, insofar that it's every year we should say prayers on the behalf of their soul, that their soul may rest in peace, in eternal rest. That's what we think about. Think about their families that might be bereaved or lost. I personally lost my aunt, her husband, and 4 children, and they were British, but they happened to be living in Belgium at the time. And they were taken from Belgium to France, and within a day or two, actually just a day after the Jewish New Year, in Auschwitz, they ended their lives on this world. But that's one thing to remember. But the other thing to remember is not, in my mind, to my view, not so much the perpetrators, but what happened. And what can we do? Well, we can, just like Abraham Levine from the Enfield Synagogue all those years ago was bringing light to darkness. What he did was during the darkness of the Holocaust. It took place in that particular era during those years. So what can we do? Well, let's look at it in this way. They are, to bring light as such, any positive action is light. You know, light doesn't have a battle with darkness. There's no fight, there is no war. Light is automatic. It brings, when you bring light, darkness is dispelled. That's the thing. And the interesting thing is, if I'm a candle and I give my light to somebody else, I don't lose an iota of my own particular light. No candle loses itself in sharing that light with somebody else. It's a fantastic thing. There's an old story. I don't remember the detail exactly, but maybe someone who listens to me will remember it. But it's about a king, I think, who wanted to choose a son-in-law for the princess. She was fantastic, and he set them a target. He said, "I've got this room." Gave the dimensions. It was a large room. He said, "I want you, whoever wants to marry my daughter, fill this room. And if you fill the room that I can't get anything else into it, then you will have the merit of being married to my princess, my daughter." So one guy came along and filled it with straw, and it filled it from floor to ceiling with straw. But nevertheless, as much as he put in, the king came in and said, "Well, I can put more in." Another guy came in and wanted to put, I think it was sand. I don't remember the exact detail, but the third person I do remember. The third person didn't put anything into the room, nothing at all. He just came into the room with the king and he switched on the light. And he says, "This dark room is now full of light." And he was the one who got the princess. But that's a remarkable, fantastic story, that little act of bringing light dispels. Now, we also need to reflect on something else, and that is that every single one of us was created by the one God. And every one of us are therefore linked to each other. They were the ancestors. When I say Adam and Eve, and then subsequently also Noah, they were the ancestors of the entire human race. Therefore, we all have a responsibility. And what the sages point out is, why was he created alone, singularly, as an individual? You know, the animals of the world were created in massive numbers, and so was everything else. But what about the human being? Just one. To teach us a very important lesson, that each single one human being is important and vital. And if one individual unfortunately is murdered or killed, then it's like a whole world, because each person has got that importance, just like the very first person that was created. So what can we do to bring light? Well, I want to make the following suggestion. There's a well-known established fact that there are 7 laws known as the Noahide laws, named after Noah, and these apply to the entire universe, the entire humanity. Doesn't matter what religion we have, what faith we have, what beliefs we have, what God we have. Everyone has to believe in the one God who created the world, and acknowledge him, and acknowledge that he cares about the world, number one. Second law is not to curse our creator. The third law is no murder, because of no value can be, you cannot measure the value of an individual, of the destroying of one life. It, as I said before, destroys an entire world. Another law is not to eat any limb of a living animal, which by extension means cruelty to animals is off. No, we have to treat animals with respect and kindness. The fifth one is not to steal, which is quite obvious. The sixth one is not to commit adultery. Family unit is a foundation of human society. And the seventh one, very important, is to establish courts of law and ensure justice takes place in the world. Now, if we are to follow those laws, as was wished by our ancestors, we will realize that these laws are relevant to all people at all times and in all places. Offshoots of this are charity, kindness, honoring parents, respect for other people, prayer, are all offshoots of these 7 basic laws which apply to the whole of humankind. If we are to practice them, in the proper way, then we will be the light. We bring light to the world of darkness. The world is not a jungle. The world depends a lot on education. And to recap, just let me quote to you a quotation from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which my wife referred to when she was interviewed some time ago. And he said as follows, that the first man, Adam, was created as a single individual, that it was the reason why it was God's design that the human race, humans everywhere and in all times, should know that each and all descend from the one and the same single progenitor, a fully developed human being created in the image of God, so that no human being could claim superior ancestral origin, and hence also find it easier to cultivate a real feeling of kinship and all interhuman relationships. These are offshoots of the things. Now, what does it boil down to? It also, in my view, would boil down to education. And here I want to say as follows. Education in general should not be limited to the acquisition of knowledge and preparation for career, or, in common parlance, to make a better living. We must think in terms of a better living, not only for the individual, but also for society as a whole. And this recollection of the Holocaust, one method of bringing light to the world is to remember those 7 principles. If every nation was to apply them, particularly establish courts of law and ensure justice, then the world would be a far better place. And that would be light to say to the darkness. That would be a positive way of remembering the Holocaust. Not, as I say, the perpetrators, but to avoid anything similar happening today to whether it's any country or people in the world, no matter whether it's the Middle East or whether it's Africa or whether it's further beyond, to remember that we are all humans and we all must take that message of the 7 laws to create a world which is going to be useful and happy for all people to live in it. And also, why do I say education? Because that is so very important. It's interesting. If I try to explain a point to somebody else and they do get it, what do they say? I see. What do you mean I see? It's something which is grasped by the mind. The mind sees. What is there in other words when you tell somebody something and he understands what you say? He is enlightened. So there you again have the word of light opening up the darkness that might exist in someone's brain. So here we have to bring light into the darkness, which is the theme. And I must say that it's very interesting that the Holocaust Memorial always comes closely after the festival of Hanukkah. And the main message of Hanukkah is a little light dispels a great deal of darkness. And the way that we celebrate Hanukkah is we start off by lighting 1 candle each day. We increase for 8 days until we have a full set of 8 candles. Why 8 candles? Because the days of the week are 7. 8 is like beyond. But what we've happened is, don't forget, I lit 1 candle the first night. That was fantastic. But it wasn't good enough for the second night. On the second night, I had to increase in the light. And that must be our jobs, to remember light is a beautiful thing. People see physically, people see mentally, people feel better, people have a greater feeling of joy and appreciation. And maybe God's will that we should learn from the past, not from history, but from memory, to lead a more positive and enlightening type of life and spread it around. We are all equal in God's eyes. We all have the privilege of doing that job of shedding and spreading the light for the benefit of everyone else. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. It's lovely to see so many people logging on the online platform for tonight's commemorative event of the Holocaust Memorial Day. I want to thank His Worshipful Mayor, the leader of the council, members of parliament, our councillors, our borough commander, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and especially our residents who are all watching our online event this year. I hope you're all well, and I hope you're all keeping safe. Please continue to follow the government's guidelines to help reduce coronavirus spread in our borough and in the world. My name is Councillor Nneka Keazor, and I'm the Community, Safety and Cohesion Cabinet Member for London Borough of Enfield. It's a great honor and it's a privilege for me to say a few words about this year's Holocaust Memorial Day. Theme is Be a Light in the Darkness. And for us, being a light in the darkness means, one, to drive away darkness from the lives of people suffering trauma. And so today we shall be invited to reflect upon how we can be light in the darkness, the trauma faced by those suffering from persecution and from genocide, the utterly unprecedented times through which we are all living currently are showing the very best of which humanity is capable, but also in some of the abuse and conspiracy theories being spread on social media, the much darker side of our world. We see how communities have come together during this pandemic to support one another in our communities, and that we are very proud of. And within the program this evening, you will hear two life stories from Enfield. These stories reiterate the importance of experiences faced by families. In our stories, we'll be looking at young people fleeing persecution on the Kinder transport, Gerald Granston, who still lives in Enfield, and Greta Glober, who was evacuated to Enfield following persecution of the Jews in Austria in 1939. Holocaust Memorial Day is not only about remembering past genocide and honoring those who died, but also an opportunity to learn lessons from the past through the stories of those who survived. Holocaust Memorial Day helps to provide an insight into how communities can support those escaping persecution today and also those looking to build new homes within our communities. A common theme when reflecting upon their lives before persecution, survivors of the Holocaust and subsequent genocide remember the familiar sights, the familiar smell, and the familiar sounds that made their lives dark with trauma. Although each story is different from the next, survivors whose testimony we will share hold many parallels about what dark days they lived with very little hope for light in their lives. And so I'm humbled tonight because I remember very sadly my homeland, which suffered genocide for nearly 3 years between 1967 and 1970, where over 3 million Biafra citizens died and children for the first and the only time in the world died of kwashiorkor. These things are explored today, and I hope we will reflect on them in solemn appreciation of the comfort and safety of light when undertaking our journeys from this place at the end of this commemorative evening. Thank you all for watching, and please continue to watch the activities that we still have on the online platform. Thank you.
Welcome everybody. Our Holy Torah begins with description of creation. When God created heaven and earth, the earth was in chaos with darkness over the surface of the abyss. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good. Both light and darkness were created by God, but only light is described as being good. Ever since the beginning of creation, humanity had to struggle between these two forces, the force of darkness, chaos, death and destruction, and the force of light, life and goodness. And ever since creation, each of us were awarded with free will, with the choice between those two polarizing forces, light and darkness. order and chaos, good and evil, war and peace. And the choices we make as individuals affect the choices we make as a society. The clouds of darkness of World War II have their roots in the previous World War. Hitler and those around him sought to solve Germany's post-war problems, and they rallied people around them by adopting and communicating a dark narrative. In Genesis, God created the world with the power of speech. God said, "Let there be light." There was light. The Nazis used this very divine gift to say, "Let there be darkness," and darkness descended on the world. Hitler described the Jews as a race tuberculosis of the peoples, and told his people that the ultimate goal must be the removal of the Jews altogether. The Nazis used words such as Untermensch, subhumans, to justify the subjugation and mass murder of those they saw as the other. It was these words of darkness and hatred that caused the senseless death and destruction of 6 million Jews and many, many millions of others. Indiscriminate victims of these dark words included those whom the Nazis meant to save, protect, award with Lebensraum, territorial living space, and turn them into Herrenvolk, a master race. Yet against these dark words and deeds, there was an even greater light, the light of resistance and opposition against what appeared to be unstoppable and invincible forces of darkness, the light of those who helped victims of persecution, often with the great risk for themselves, the light of kindness and consideration, even in unimaginable harsh conditions of Nazi death camps, the light of treating all people with humanity as brothers and sisters, all created B'Tselem, in the image of God. This light is not easy to maintain. It requires the promotion of values such as democracy, liberalism, and mutual respect, and it requires us to educate ourselves and our children about the horrors of the past. In our days, the forces of darkness and chaos try to raise their heads again. Terrorism makes us suspicious of certain faiths and denominations. We are back to a worrying trend of global arms race and increasing territorial pressures. Brexit causes tension between us, British, and our European brothers and sisters. Social media makes it easier to feed us with lies and deception and turn us into angry and polarized individuals. And even the strongest fortresses of light and democracy are at times stormed by those who listen to dark words of cynical, self-serving leaders who wish to bring darkness and chaos. It is our duty to actively fight against these forces and ensure they do not consume our world and draw us back into the abyss. It is our duty to amplify and magnify light in our world, the light of love and care for every member of humanity, regardless of their age, religion, or skin color, the light of remembering that we are all created B'Tselem, in the image of God. Let there be light so we can keep creating and recreating a better world. Thank you.
Heroes pray each better and Enfield. For the first time in many years, in fact since Holocaust Memorial Day was set up, we are in virtual space. We can't be together physically. We are trying to share our stories, share our testimonies, and share our understanding of the Holocaust through the medium of film and television. This gives us a new chance to try and think about telling stories in new ways and making them relevant for a new generation. One of the most extraordinary stories from the Holocaust itself was about a lady named Gisela Pearl. Gisela Pearl was a gynecologist born in 1907 in Romania. And she, like many other people in Romania and in Eastern Europe during the Second World War, was taken to Auschwitz, a concentration camp, which primarily was there for the murder of many millions of people. The largest group were the Jews, 1.1 million Jews murdered in Auschwitz between the years 1939 and 1945. She was a gynecologist and she was trained as such. And her job was obviously to help people to have children, help women to have their children, and to be able to bring new life into the world. But Auschwitz, as we have learned in many cases, and you may have learned in schools, and you may have learned by watching documentaries, was a place where the world was upside down. Everything that was a certain way outside of Auschwitz was completely opposite in Auschwitz. The things which would not have mattered to you outside were the most critical things in the world in the camp. And everything which was completely insignificant outside became the most important things in the camp. So as a gynecologist, you would expect that Gisela would be able to help women to maintain their pregnancies and to have their children. But she understood that pregnant women who came into Auschwitz were very, very likely to be murdered. They were no use. They were going to be difficult. They were not physically strong. They would not be able to do the work that was expected of them. And so she extraordinarily found out who the pregnant women were. And with her bare hands, she would abort the fetuses that they had. And every time she did, she said the words to herself, "A life for a life." She was somehow collecting these lives into her experience, into her psyche, so that she would one day possibly, somehow, be able to replace them in another place, another time, another world. She miraculously survives Auschwitz, and she goes to New York and she continues to practice gynecology in New York. And now she's working in hospital and she is continuing to deliver babies. And every time a baby is born under her care, she closes her eyes and she says the words, "A life for a life." And over the course of her career in New York, she delivers well over 3,000 children. And she feels at the end, as she writes in her extraordinary memoirs in 1948 and then interviews later in her life, she says that she knew that in Auschwitz she would have to take away these lives in order to protect the women who were carrying these unborn children. And what she did was she tried to replace them again after the war. She was saved, whether it was a coincidence, whether it was a miracle, whether it was the divine plan. She had work to do after the Holocaust. And as she delivers all these children and she makes her statement, "A life for a life," she in fact takes the lives that she had to terminate in order to protect these women, and she replaces them in the world with new children, with new life, with new possibilities. This is an extraordinary story, and I invite you to study online and go and look up Dr. Gisela Pearl and find out more about her, because the story itself is inspiring, but the tenacity of a woman who uses her knowledge and her skills in the most extraordinary way possible. She is stopping life in one place, holding it in stasis, and re-emerging again in another place. She was, in a sense, called on to be able to replace life after the Holocaust. And I think that is our message. After difficult and dark times, the theme of this year is from darkness to light. There are dark times around us, even in our current pandemic, that we can't be together again. We can't be together in the families and in the friendship groups that we always so treasure. Maybe this life is being held in stasis at the moment, so that after things become easier and the vaccines are rolled out, we have a chance to be with our older members and friends and dear family, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents again. Maybe we'll have a chance to replace the life that was taken from us during these last few months into a new world where it'll be easier to survive. We'll have a better sense of who we are, but we won't forget the kindnesses and the strength we have learnt during these past 10 or 11 months. I want to wish you well, and hopefully this year's Holocaust Memorial Day, 27th of January 2021, will be one that will be etched in your memories forever, and you'll take these memories and these experiences with you to the rest of your lives. Wishing you all well.
Well, thank you to all of the speakers that have just made some very strong contributions to tonight's event. It's hard listening for a lot of you, and as I always say when we're in the Dugdale Centre, I can't apologise for prevailing upon you and the forbearance you have to endure to listen to some stories and the thinking behind them, because tonight is not meant to be it's not a happy day, it's a commemorative day, and we have to sit back and listen. So I thank you for your patience and your perseverance in listening, but hopefully you've taken the time to reflect and think and maybe wonder about what you individually might be able to do about and work with the stories that you've heard. So now it's the film that I mentioned at the start of tonight's event. It's a new film. It's been put together in the last few months, and it's called Be the Light, inevitably because it is reflecting the theme of Be the Light in the Darkness. What you're going to hear are a series of personal testimonies from people, including Holocaust survivors, one of whom, Gerald Granston, who with his wife Cynthia, we were honoured to have as our keynote speaker a few years ago here in Enfield. He's here again to retell some of his stories and some of his experiences and how he's rebuilt his life and his family's life in Enfield. We also have another speaker who went to school in Enfield County, and we also have contributions from the Jewish Museum, who I have to say have been excellent in their support to all the staff and associated bodies in putting the whole Holocaust package together this year, and we thank the Jewish Museum in Camden Town greatly for that. And what I want you to do today is recognise that there is life beyond the darkness. The people are going to tell their own stories, but they're going to tell the stories of their connection to Enfield to make it very personal to them, but also personal to you and to us, councillors, residents, members of the community here in Enfield. It's going to be about half an hour or so. It's actually very enlightening. It's actually very inspiring, and it has elements of humour remarkably about it, because humour is such an important part of the resilience of the human spirit. So I ask you to sit back again and watch, and when finished I'll be back just to sum up and wrap up tonight's event. So ladies and gentlemen, be the light.
The theme of this year's event being the light in the darkness is particularly poignant, and I am aware that there have been moments over the past year where a ray of light in what has felt like very, very dark times has given people the hope to continue. For Holocaust Memorial Day, it's really about shining light on what can be really difficult issues and topics. Very often for people to speak out in what is a hostile environment can feel tough, but it's to remind people that they can be that light, and those who do speak out should be supported.
I think it's a very broad phrase, as there are many ways of being a light in the darkness. One thing that really strikes me about the theme this year is how it is relevant for today, about how we can still see darkness around us. We can see rising anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, intolerance and prejudice against minority groups, and there is still very much a need for people to stand up and be a light in that darkness, to not just be bystanders.
So this year, as we celebrate the light in the darkness, we also see what's happening in the world today and how we can currently support humanity through all the discrimination and persecution that different people have suffered.
The light in the darkness is actually quite extraordinary, and in fact, it really is an amazing thing to understand. The Torah had described, as the Bible describes, it says, "Ulchol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'moshvotam," and all of the children of Israel had light in their dwelling places. And I think that is a metaphor for the notion that even if you're surrounded by darkness, if you have a sense of inner light, that there is something to look forward to, no matter how bleak, no matter how difficult, no matter how distant, that moment of hope is what takes you through the darkness, and please God, all of us will be blessed with light again.
As the Nazis grew in power, their anti-Jewish policies led to many people trying to flee Germany and Nazi-occupied countries. Greta Glauber was 9 years old when she left Austria and her mother for England on a Kindertransport. She settled with a family friend in Enfield and started attending Enfield County School. She wrote about her experiences in a school essay titled "My First Impression of England."
On my arrival in England, I was not very much impressed by what I saw. It was a wet and cold and foggy April day, and when I looked out of the train window, all I could see was spots of rain on my train window and people going about in large Macintoshes and Wellingtons looking very strange and uncomfortable. I did not like this at all, because when I had left my home 2 days ago, it was a lovely day. But I courageously got out of my carriage, more from excitement than real fear of the rain, and was soon led to a trolley bus. It sounds all right now, but when I first saw a big double-decker bus loom out of the fog, I was really, well, it's hard to describe my feeling. I was just astonished and was rather frightened to get inside in case the top fell off. My fear was soon over and the bus moved off quite smoothly except for a few bumps. I was very charmed when I got to my new home to find it was a tiny house. It was not tiny really. I was used to big blocks of flats and had never seen a house just on its own before. With its own front door and stairway, I liked it very much.
The Kindertransport was a rescue mission to rescue, it was mostly Jewish children from Nazi Germany and also Nazi occupied countries, including Austria, where of course Greta Glauber came from. Campaigners were able to convince the British government to relax immigration laws for children to come to Britain. It was only children aged 16 and under, and they would have been unaccompanied by their parents. Very quickly after this, the first train left Berlin, and trains continued to come bringing children here up until September 1939 when war broke out. In total, there were around 10,000 children who were saved this way.
And Greta was not the only one to arrive in Enfield. In Winchmore Hill, Abraham Lewin and his wife threw open their doors and provided shelter to more than 20 young people in their own home.
It's a 3-storey house, a lot of rooms, but even so, even given the number of rooms, it still must have been a bit of a squeeze with so many children. And then there was all the feeding and seeing to their needs.
They don't know his language. He doesn't know their language. They wanted different food. They were going to have nightmares at home. Can you imagine? And the clothing, the food. I don't know how he did it. The laundry. What? I was just blown away with this chesed, this kindness, that it's superhuman.
Must have been a pretty chaotic setup there. Nevertheless, from the reports I've got from people that stayed with him, everyone was very happy and very, very pleased to be there.
Although he couldn't do anything physically to stop the war or to interfere in what was happening, but he did his part here by looking after all those people, and he therefore was the epitome of being a light in the darkness to kids who were separated from their parents, and who knows what else. I just wonder about him. The guy, what kind of kitchen could he have had in that house that could feed over 30 people? What about the toilet facilities? I don't know if they had an inside toilet. I don't know, but this man, that was an enormous thing. He was being a light.
Abraham Lewin went on to become a rabbi, and in 1949 he founded the Enfield and Winchmore Hills Synagogue, in the same house used to shelter the children from the Kindertransport. However, it was not easy for people to find a safe place to escape the Nazis. Gerald Granston was just 5 years old when he and his father tried to leave Germany.
I experienced not just prejudice, but what I call state prejudice. Judenschwein, Jew pig, that was common. All shops, no dogs, no Jews served. I was born in a little village called Heschingen, south of Stuttgart, and people say you can't remember things when you were 5 years old. And I say my catalyst was the morning of the 10th November 1938, the morning of Kristallnacht. I remember clearly my grandfather running home, crying, the synagogue's destroyed. We weren't attacked as many Jews were. Their houses were ransacked, they were arrested. But they still trashed the synagogue. So where do you go? There were very few countries that accepted Jews.
Gerald's father managed to buy a visa for Cuba, and along with 935 other refugees, they chartered a ship to travel from Hamburg to Havana, the MS St. Louis.
Now the ship was commanded by a most wonderful human being, a man called Captain Schroeder, who is one of my heroes. He told the ship's company, forget what's happening in Germany today. These passengers are our passengers, and we will look after them. Forget they're Jews, they're our passengers. I remember distinctly queuing to go up the banks and hearing the Centurion voice say, "Du, Jude, here, you Jew here." They took your picture. To this day, I'm doing you a great favor because I have a fear of cameras. Great fear of cameras. I also have great fear of water. We'll come to that later.
Having arrived in Enfield, Greta Glauber was now living happily with her foster mother, a school teacher named Olive Rudkin, or Auntie O as Greta called her. She began attending Enfield County School, but as her school report shows, adjusting to her new life was not easy.
Greta just has a good in 2 subjects, history and geography. She is satisfactory or below standard in all her other subjects, and the comments on her school report from her teachers next to each subject are not the most positive. Greta has ability, but is often too lazy to use it. Other reports say that she does not show enough interest in her subjects, that she is too careless, that she needs to try harder. At this time, obviously, Greta was going through a huge emotional strain, so it can seem a little bit unsympathetic to what was going on in her life away from school at this time. Greta's mother, Elsa, had always had the intention of being able to join her daughter in England, and she was working really hard to try to apply for a visa. However, in a letter that arrives on the 11th of September 1939, Elsa writes that she has a visa, but it is now too late to get the last train out of Vienna because war had broken out, and war stopped many Jewish refugees from being able to come to this country. The last letter that Greta received from her mother was the 27th of August 1942, in which she writes that she hopes they will be reunited. But we know that wasn't the case. Trying to trace exactly what happened to Elsa is very difficult. All we can say for certain is that she was murdered in the Holocaust. Greta does show a lot of emotional maturity in the letters that we have from her. When she writes to her mother, she seems to be trying to reassure her, saying that she is fine and the school is fine, even when the school reports we have suggest that it doesn't seem to all be fine and that she was struggling with things. When she was separated from her Auntie O, from Olive Rudkin, again, she's very positive, saying that the people are nice, that she's doing all right. However, she must have been living with great uncertainty. Decisions about her future, Olive Rudkin does adopt her, and she takes the name Rudkin as well. After this, she went on to follow in her foster mother's footsteps and became an infant school teacher. One of the last documents in our collection dates to 1964 and is a school report, but of a different type because it is a report on a school teacher. It is of a Miss Rudkin at a school in Somerset, and it is highly, highly positive about her abilities as a teacher. Whilst Greta's story does have many elements of darkness in it, I think there are also multiple examples of light. I think Greta herself symbolises this light in a very dark story. Her positivity and her determination to try to bring comfort to her mother, who is going through very, very difficult circumstances, and her aunt. She's always trying to encourage them, trying to convince them she's fine and they don't need to worry. You have the individuals who helped, who stood up and did something, like Olive Rudkin. And then I suppose you also have the type of light in Greta's life that she went on to do. Greta's childhood came at a time of darkness. Greta was fortunate in that she was able to get a place on the kinder transport. She was able to escape. She was able to survive the Holocaust. And she went on to go and bring light to other people as an infant school teacher. So I think she herself is the main example of light for me in that story.
Going on the St. Louis was to me an adventure. So I got to Hamburg, obviously excited, and when we sailed, May the 13th, 1939, we knew our place. We were Jews, we were vermin, we were Untermenschen. The voyage to Cuba, 2 weeks, was a wonderful, wonderful, joyous occasion. Problems started when we got to Cuba.
When the St. Louis arrived in Havana, it was refused entry to dock. Despite all the passengers believing they had legal visas, the Cuban government refused to accept anybody.
I remember queuing with my dad, proudly holding a little suitcase, awaiting immigration and customs who came on the ship, and they were wonderfully happy. Hello, hello. But I learned my one and only word of Spanish on that morning. Mañana, mañana, tomorrow. And off they went. And when they came back tomorrow, and it was the same scenario, panic became evident to him. What's gone wrong? What's gone wrong? Why can't we get off the ship? Captain Schroeder put on civilian clothes, went to Havana, begged nothing. He was now being played by the Hamburg American line. Get back to your ship and bring it back to Hamburg. We need the ship here. My father said to me many times that he actually spoke to Captain Schroeder and said to him, Captain, you will be bringing an empty ship back to Germany because we would rather jump overboard and drown than go back to Germany. So it was a terrible time. Schroeder then up anchor, but instead of sailing the ship back to Germany, for 5 days up and down the Florida coast, he was convinced that Roosevelt would say, bring the ship back. The New York Times had an interview with the harbor master of Miami, and his words today, I promise you, no port in America will allow the Jews to land, not the passengers, not the tourists, not the immigrants, whatever you want to call them, the Jews. So there was anti-Semitism there. We were so close, I could see the lights of the hotels in Florida. If we could see them, they could see the ship. And we then had to realize we were going back. I was terrified, absolutely terrified.
Having been turned away by Cuba and America, the St. Louis seemed destined to return to Nazi Germany. But on June 17, 1939, a deal was struck between Britain, France, Belgium and the Netherlands, each agreeing to admit a share of the passengers. Gerald and his father eventually landed in Southampton. He went on to lead a successful life and now lives in Enfield. However, not all the passengers were so lucky.
Those that came here all survived. Those that went to France, Belgium and Holland, half didn't. Because once war was declared and those countries were taken over by Germany, they were the first to be arrested and sent to camps. It was a terrifying 42 days on the St. Louis. There, back at the time in Havana and up and down the Florida coast. We left on May the 13th. We got to Southampton on the 21st of June. So it was a long, long time. Captain Schroeder was eventually sacked. He did survive the war, but penniless. And in 1956, Schroeder was awarded a medal by the West German government for his humanitarian treatment of his passengers. He died soon after, but he has been honored in the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem as a righteous amongst the Gentiles. So his name is remembered. And when my daughter or I go to Jerusalem, always find the memorial to him. Because without him and his guts, I wouldn't be here.
Very quickly, it became apparent that Jews were not going to be tolerated by the Nazi regime.
Gerald now travels around the country, sharing his story with young people. He has been awarded the British Empire Medal for his services to Holocaust education.
The main now of my talks is prejudice. And I warn the students, whether they are 14, 15-year-old or 18, 20-year-old, whatever, they are the future of this country. And if they don't fight prejudice, it'll take over. Prejudice is the most evil thing, whether it is anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, you still have prejudice to this day. I would love to be able to say that the Holocaust 1939-45 was the end. There have been many other Holocausts since then.
So often the sort of phrase that goes with the Holocaust is never again. And I think it's important that we remember that there have been genocides since then. The Holocaust is not just something that happened in a different time, that is past, that is over, that we can remember, but we don't need to sort of be wary of in that sense. It is still important to remember what does happen when you let discriminatory language and prejudice go unchecked, how quickly these sorts of things can build up, and that it has happened multiple times since the Holocaust, and so we need to be on the lookout in our own society for examples of prejudice. Keep remembering and keep educating people.
Holocaust Memorial Day is not just a day to remember the Holocaust itself. It is a day when you understand what can happen when societies misunderstand the importance and the power and the responsibility that they have to look after their people. There are many times we think that we're not the people who would do this. If we were in that situation, we would never contemplate something as horrific as this. But what is important to understand on Holocaust Memorial Day is that it wasn't monsters who created this final solution for the Jews, or who enabled the Third Reich to behave in a way that tried to systematically annihilate an entire people. What it says is that human beings were capable of this. And if those human beings were capable of this, then theoretically, any human beings are capable of this. That, I think, is a shocking realization. And we've seen it across the 20th century. We saw it in Stalinist Russia. We saw it in Maoist China, when millions of people were killed for a cause that they thought was greater than the people whose lives they were taking.
Remembering the genocides not only from the Nazis, but also Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, and currently we're looking at the present day situations around the world, partnering with people that have gone through difficult times and saying, we hear you, we see you, and we are here with you.
Well, Enfield's an incredibly diverse borough, and it has been for many, many decades. It's a borough that so many different communities have chosen to make their home. You know, I am the granddaughter of immigrants who moved here to the UK in the 70s to also escape persecution.
Holocaust Memorial Day in Enfield is not just about remembering the past genocides and honouring those who died, but also is an opportunity for us in Enfield to learn lessons from the past, and through the stories that we hear of those who survived those traumatic times, we want to use it to help and bring our communities together.
When we see darkness around us, sometimes it can be too tempting to just sort of sit back, not want to be noticed, not raise our voices. But we need to speak up when we see discrimination around us. We need to speak up when we see people not being treated with tolerance that everybody deserves. We need to make our voices heard if we want to be a light in the darkness.
And the darkness is essentially, it's not just about evil. Sometimes darkness is just being ignorant and not being aware of what is happening. Sometimes it is ignoring difficult issues and difficult trends that exist in society and for the individual. And therefore, light is really the way to see the future, the way to build a better world.
We can take those ideas that we are discussing here and give people pause for thought, and maybe we can evaluate our own actions, decide on the best way forward, and ensure that the way we behave from this moment on will be for the positive embetterment of the societies around us. That, I think, is the ultimate lesson to learn from the Holocaust.
And as we say in the Jewish tradition, that a little light can disperse much darkness.
And with that film, we come to the end of the 2021 Holocaust Memorial Day event here in Enfield. All it remains for me to do is to thank all of the speakers at tonight's event. I want to repeat thanks to the advisors and supporters we've had at the SACRE, the Advisory Committee for Religious Education, RE today. There's been a huge amount of effort going on within the council. With too many names to mention, I have to say you all know who you are, and I, on behalf of the councillors and personally, want to thank you for all that you've done, all the support teams that have played a part in all of this. And of course, I also want to make final reference to the Jewish Museum and to Gerald, who's also been instrumental in feeding a lot of the content of the film that you've just seen. Now, traditionally, when I bring events to an end in the Dugdale Centre, I invite you to come out for a buffet, and I always say be quick because the fish balls will all go very, very quickly. Well, you all know that's not going to happen today, but hopefully those of you who live near La Boucherie in East Finchley or in Stamford Hill have been to Dagims and Hoffman and have got your own supply. That has been in it for this year. Thank you all again. Thank you for being here. And if you're watching this after the event, please take heed and take note and remember that the torch needs to be burning. We invest our faith in the young people of Enfield to keep the flag flying and keep the torch alight, the torch of eternal light, just like we have in the Civic Centre here in Enfield. My hope is that in 2022, on Thursday the 27th of January, as it will be, we'll be able to be back in the Dugdale Centre and to put together a more traditional event of the kind that many of you have been used to. But meantime, I want to say, on behalf of Enfield Council, the team behind tonight's event, from me personally, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Please reflect and stay safe. Good night.